Salvete discipuli, discipulaeque linguae Latinae, mihi valde placet vos pulchram Latinam aeternam docere. What we examine next may appear daunting at first, but once we have mastered this set of endings, we will be in a position to handle most Latin nouns and adjectives, and we will review. Ad astra per aspera. This is a Latin phrase that means to the stars through difficulties. Astra and aspera are two good accusative neuter plurals that, whether you know the declensions or not, you can already parse. Ad astra, to the stars. Per aspera, through difficulties. In other words, the path to greatness requires effort. Ad astra per aspera. And the view from the stars is great. Let us examine adjective endings for the first feminine and second masculine and neuter declension endings. Now we're going to focus primarily on adjectives in this lesson, but we should note, and this is good news, that these endings also work for all first and second declension nouns. They're the same. And for this reason, we will include third declension noun endings in this lesson for the sake of comparison and review in our rather large chart. Now, this complete chart of first and second declension adjective endings and third declension noun endings is more than most human beings can take in at one glance. So we're going to run through each declension individually and then compare endings case by case. That's horizontally. Looking for points of similarity as well as potential pitfalls when the cases of one declension look similar to different cases of other declensions. Let's begin at the beginning with the first declension, which is characterized by the vowel A. Nominative, a short A, The genitive, AE, pronounced I. The dative, AE, pronounced I. The accusative, AM, pronounced And then the ablative. Again, it's an A, but it's a long A, which we can mark with a long mark or macron, Ah. And the plural, the nominative, AE, again pronounced I. The genitive, arum, that's a long A-R-U-M, arum. The dative, it's a long I, followed by an S. We pronounce it is. And the accusative plural, a long A again, followed by an S, pronounced as. The ablative, again long I, followed by S, is. Or, in chanting form, for the first declension, and please repeat after me, the singular, ah. Notice I was making a macron. Again in the singular, ah. And in the plural, arum, as, is. Again in the plural, arum, as, is. Let's do the feminine first declension endings again. First the singular. And the plural, arum, as, is. One more time. Arum, as, is. The masculine and neuter second declension forms are characterized by the vowel O, although we also find you and I. The nominative for the masculine is us. We can pronounce it us. It's also frequently enough er. So it's actually us or The genitive is a long I, pronounced e. The dative, a long O, pronounced o. The accusative, pronounced And the ablative, again a long O, pronounced O. Note please that in the singular, the neuter differs from the masculine only in the nominative. And that, as is true for the third declension, neuter endings are the same in the nominative and accusative. But let's look first at the masculine plural. The nominative is a long I, pronounced E. And for the neuter, the plural, is an A, pronounced ah. The genitive, for both, is aurum. That's a long O, R-U-M, pronounced aurum. The dative, for both the masculine and neuter, is a long I, followed by an S, pronounced is. The accusative for the masculine is a long O, followed by S, os. And for the neuter, the nominative form repeats, and again we get an A, ah. We can actually see some similarities between the neuters of the second declension and the third declension. The neuters are always the same in the nominative and accusative. But let's look finally at the ablative plural for both the neuter and masculine second declension. We find a long I followed by S, and we pronounce that is. Now, it's hard to look at two genders at the same time, so let's focus on the masculine and look at the endings in chanting form. And let's keep in mind we can substitute ER, the for the us in the nominative singular, but we'll just use the us ending, which is the more common for our chanting of masculine second declension endings. Please repeat in the singular. Us, E, O, O. Again in the singular. Us, E, O, O. And in the plural, E, orum, is, os, is. And again in the plural, E, orum, is, os, is. Okay, one more time for the masculine second declension. First in the singular, us, E, O, O. And in the plural, E, orum, is, os, is. And now let's look at our chanting form of the neuter second declension endings. First in the singular, E, O, O. And the plural, ah, orum, is, is. And one more time for the neuter second declension, E, O, O. Ah, orum, is, is. What we have chanted so far will not be enough for mastering these forms. Absolutely not. You will need to practice, and we will need to review together. But let's proceed for now and compare these endings across the cases. We will begin with the nominative singular endings. The first declension feminine nominative singular ends with A. The second declension masculine nominative singular generally ends in US, but sometimes in ER. And the second declension neuter nominative ends in UM. Third declension nominatives, no matter what the gender, do not have predictable endings. We call them blank. What can we say then about these nominative forms? Nominative forms do not show many similarities. It is also important to remember that the first declension feminine singular can look like a neuter plural and vice versa. Similarly, the second declension neuter singular ending can look like the genitive plural ending of the third declension. And because the third declension has such a wide variety of endings in the nominative, we do not know what may turn up in a third declension nominative singular. The ending US, for example, which can serve as the second declension masculine ending, is a real possibility for third declension neuter nouns. The word corpus, body, for example, is, as you know, neuter and belongs to the third declension. The lesson? Beware the nominative. Do not trust nominative forms. We must always check the genitive to know the declension of a noun. The genitive case is our friend. It reveals the declension, and if we remove the genitive ending, we can find the word's true base. Let's look at these trustworthy friends, the genitive singular endings in the first declension genitive, feminine singular. First declension feminine genitive singular, we find AE. If you see an AE in the genitive, it's first declension. In the second declension masculine genitive singular, we find a long I. In the second declension neuter genitive singular, we find, once again, a long I. And because the masculine and neuter share that long I, they both belong to the second declension. And in the third declension, what is the genitive singular? In the masculine and feminine singulars, we find a short IS. And in the third declension genitive neuter singular, again, short IS. And that is why masculine, feminine, and neuter third declension belong together. They all share that IS. And that is an important observation. Declensions share genitive singular endings. Only the first declension has a genitive singular in AE. Only the second declension has a genitive in long I. And only the third declension has a genitive in short IS. And that IS is a short IS pronounced is. By their genitives thou shalt know them. The genitive is the crucial key that unlocks the mystery of what declension a noun or adjective belongs to. And that is why nouns are listed first in the nominative and then in the genitive. We will compare, next, the dative and ablative together for reasons that should soon become obvious. In the first declension feminine singular, we find dative AE and ablative a long A. These are not the same endings, so it's not obvious yet. However, when we look at the masculine and neuter second declension dative and ablative endings, we find that both cases share a long O. They are the same in the second declension. In the third declension singular, if we look at the masculine and feminine as well as the neuter, we find a dative in long I and an ablative in short E. So what are the lessons? Dative and ablative singular endings are sometimes, but not always, the same. We can also say that except for the first declension dative singular, AE, which is a diphthong, dative and ablative endings tend to be a single vowel sound, O, A, I, and E. Let's look at the accusative singular. In the first declension accusative feminine singular, where we find In the second declension masculine accusative singular, we find In the second declension neuter accusative singular, we find In the third declension masculine and feminine singulars, we find M. And in the third declension accusative neuter singular, it's a blank slate. The accusative case shows some real similarities in the singular. Each and every accusative singular except the third declension neuter, which is a wild card, ends in an M. That's good to know when we look for direct objects. So although accusative UMs will sometimes have to be distinguished from their third declension genitive plurals and neuter nominative singulars, that M ending should not, and it will not, be confused with a genitive singular, and certainly not with a dative or ablative singular, since those are vowels. Let's look at our nominative plurals. In the first declension nominative feminine plural, we find AE. And in the second declension masculine nominative plural, we find long I. In the second declension neuter nominative plural, we find A or and in the third declension nominative masculine and feminine plurals, we find long ES, ace. And in the third declension nominative neuter plural, we find A again, The plural nominative, again, shows a mixed picture. Apart from the masculine and feminine nominatives of the third declension, we find vowels. One bright spot. All neuter nominative plurals are the same. They end in A. Second or third declension. If only neuter plurals did not look like the feminine singulars, but we can't have everything. Let's look at our genitive plurals. In the first declension genitive feminine plural, we find arum. In the second declension masculine genitive plural, we find orum. In the second declension neuter genitive plural, we find orum. In the third declension genitive masculine and feminine plurals, we find And in the third declension genitive neuter plural, we find The genitive plural shows us some real systemic similarities. All genitive plurals end in And the first and second declension genitive plurals precede that genitive with their theme vowels. Long A for the first declension, arum, and long O for the second declension masculine, orum. Let's look at our accusative plurals. In the first declension accusative feminine plural, we find long AS, as. In the second declension masculine accusative plural, we find long OS, os. In the second declension neuter accusative plural, we find A again, In the third declension accusative masculine and feminine plurals, long ES, ace. And in the third declension accusative neuter plural, we find A, The accusative plural likewise reveals some patterns. Neuter accusative plurals repeat their nominative forms. The letter A, and all masculine and feminine accusative plurals, whether first, whether second, or whether third declension, these accusative plurals end in S. The first declension feminine accusative plural precedes that S with its long theme vowel A, as. The second declension masculine accusative plural precedes that S with its long theme vowel O, os. And the third declension masculine and feminine accusative plurals precede that S with a long E pronounced A, ace. We're almost there. Let's look at our dative and ablative plurals. Why we compare dative and ablative plurals together will now very quickly become obvious. In the first declension feminine plural, we find in the dative long is pronounced is. And in the ablative again, long is pronounced is. I submit, they're the same. In the second declension masculine plural, we find in the dative, long is, pronounced is, and in the ablative, again, long is, pronounced is. I submit, they're the same. In the second declension plural, we find in the dative, long is, pronounced is, and in the ablative, again, long is, pronounced is. I think those are the same. In the third declension masculine and feminine plurals, we find in the dative, ibus, and in the ablative, ibus. I think those are the same. And in the third declension neuter plural, we find in the dative, ibus, and in the ablative, you knew it before I even said it, ibus. Do I repeat myself? You betcha. They're the same. The ablative and dative plural endings are friendly indeed. There are, if we count them up, only two of them. A long is pronounced is for first and second declension words, and please note that the first and second declension dative and ablative plural is differs from the genitive singular of the third declension because the I of this is long, not short. And our only ending for dative and ablative plurals of the third declension, ibus. This looks like a lot, but broken down, the similarities help us remember the cases and navigate the syntax, even of words we may not be able to parse fully. And that is why we must learn and study all these gorgeous endings. But we must distinguish adjectives from nouns. Adjectives modify nouns. And in Latin, adjectives are agreeable, very agreeable. Adjectives take their cue from nouns and agree with them in three things: case, number, and gender, but not ending. Adjectives can change their gender from masculine to feminine, from feminine to neuter, their number from singular to plural, in their case from nominative to ablative. But adjectives cannot change their declension. Sometimes endings match letter for letter between adjective and noun. Sometimes they do not, and yet adjectives will agree with the nouns they modify in case, number, and gender. Let's take a look. The word for big, large, or great in Latin is magna, feminine, magnus, masculine, or magnum, neuter. Because big appears in these three forms, we know that magnus, masculine, magna, feminine, magnum, neuter, is a first and second declension adjective. A big masculine soldier is a miles magnus. A big feminine light is a lux magna. And a big neuter body is a corpus magnum. In each instance, we chose the gender of magnus, magna, magnum, that would match the gender of the noun we wanted to modify, although none of the endings matched between the two words. But they did agree in case, number, and gender. Let's take a quick look at how magnus, magna, magnum would look as it would be listed in a dictionary. What you would find, often enough, would be the letters M-A-G-N, and then a dot, and then the US ending, so that you would know that when you saw comma dash A, comma dash UM, that you would precede that and that with the stem M-A-G-N. And then it would be followed by its part of speech, adjective, and its meaning big. Why do they do this? Lexicographers like to save ink and paper, and so they abbreviate. When we see magnus we are supposed to supply the stem for the truncated which gives us, if we spell everything out, magnus, magna, magnum. Try this. Bonus, dash a, dash adjective, good. Can you expand that adjective into its three full forms? Bonus, bona, bonum. Here's a somewhat tougher one that ends in er in the masculine. Liber, adjective free. Can you expand it? Liber, libera, liberum. The takeaway? First and second declension adjectives appear in the nominative singular for the most part as us, but sometimes as Let's take a closer look at how we modify nouns with adjectives. Nox noctis is a feminine noun that means night. What is the declension? The genitive ends in a short is. Is. Right. Night is third declension. I would like to decline the everlasting night, or the never-ending night in the singular. The adjective that means everlasting in Latin gave us our word perpetual. The Latin adjective is perpetuus or spelled out more fully, perpetuus, perpetua, perpetuum. Hence, first and second declension. We need the feminine first declension so that we can modify the feminine night in Latin. So which one do you want? If you said nox perpetua or perpetua nox, you were spot on. We'll put the adjective in its normal place in Latin word order after the noun, and then decline everlasting night in the singular. Let's begin with the nominative singular. The everlasting night scares me. Nox perpetua. The genitive singular, of the everlasting night. Noctis perpetuae. Dative singular, to or for the everlasting night. Nocti perpetuae. Accusative singular, I fear the everlasting night. Noctem perpetuam. And the ablative singular, by, with, or from the everlasting night. Nocte perpetua. In each instance, Perpetua agreed in case, number, and gender with nox, yet their endings never matched. Let us try modifying the masculine noun senex, senis, which means old man, with the adjective stern or severe, severos, aum. Now, if we expand severos, aum, we get severos, severa, severum. What's the declension of that noun, however? Senex, senis. Short is. Correct. Third declension. Stem is sen. So compare sen to a word we have in English, senile. You'll see that stem there. And the adjective severos, again belongs to the first and second declensions. So how would you say the stern old man? If you said senex severos, you are correct. But we only want to decline these crusty old gusters in the plural, beginning with the nominative plural. So how would we say, the stern old men gossip? Nominative plural. Senes severi. The genitive plural, of the stern old men. Senum, for our masculine third declension, and then severorum, senum severorum. The dative plural, to or for the stern old men. Senibus severis. The accusative plural, I disregard the stern old men. Senes severos. An ablative plural, by, with, or from the stern old men. Senibus severis. And let us conclude by modifying the neuter noun basium, basii, kiss, with the adjective fiery, glowing, hot, burning. What better way to conclude than with a fiery kiss? The Latin adjective is fervidus, first and second declension. But take a look at the genitive of basium, basii. That genitive ends in a long I, not is. So this word is not a neuter third declension, but a neuter second declension. What does this mean? As I mentioned at the beginning of this lecture, first and second declension adjective endings work for first and second declension nouns too. If you can decline a neuter adjective, you can decline a neuter noun. There's another interesting phenomenon. The endings on the adjective will match the endings on the noun, as well as agree with them. That happens sometimes too. Are you ready for some fiery kisses in Latin? Nominative singular, the fiery kiss burns their lips. Basium fervidum. Genitive singular, of the fiery kiss. Basii fervidi. Dative singular, to or for the fiery kiss. Basio fervido. Accusative singular, I would like a fiery kiss, please. Basium fervidum. Ablative singular, by, with, or from the fiery kiss. Basio fervido. Nominative plural, fiery kisses are dangerous. Basia fervida. Genitive plural, of the fiery kisses. Basiorum fervidorum. Dative plural, to or for the fiery kisses. Basiis fervidis. Accusative plural, why does he get the fiery kisses? Basia, fervida. An ablative plural, by, with, or from the fiery kisses. Basiis, fervidis. I hate to kiss and run, but tempus fugit, as they say, and I think you get the idea. The endings sometimes match, and often they don't, but they always agree. And these endings of the first and second declension were a lot to absorb. So I suggest studying them intensively before moving on to the next lesson. Ad astra per aspera, to the neuter plural accusative stars by way of the neuter plural difficulties. The journey is worth it, and I have every confidence in you. Ad astra per aspera. And again, please feel free. Put me on a loop. I don't mind. I'm happy to practice. Everlasting night, strict old men, and fiery kisses at any time. And with that, all of you, omnes linguae Latinae amatores, all lovers of the Latin language, you're free to go so that you may learn Latin, ut linguam Latinam discatis, and practice it again on your own before we meet again. Gratias vobis ago. And until we meet again, take care so that you may be well. Curate ut valeatis.